This is another live radio link-up brought to you by the Government Communications GCIS.
Welcome to this special broadcast brought to you by Government Communication and Information System. This is another Let's Talk Justice and episode 16, where we will be talking more about Child Justice Act. And the main aim is to raise awareness on Child Justice Act as well as to educate on the process followed according to the Child Justice Act and to explain the age group covered in this act as well as to highlight some of the benefits and also some of the challenges that you also can highlight when you speak to us on 0800 142 446. 0800 142 446 is a toll-free number that we use to engage our guests in the studio and also to share our experiences as well as pose some questions that we might be having. Thanks to all the community radio stations that are taking part in this, and this goes out to all the 9 provinces of South Africa. And also we will be speaking to our special guest, Mayor Pritima Osman. Mayor Pritima Osman is the Senior Legal Administration Officer with the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development. Welcome, Ms. Osman.
Thank you very much.
Once more, thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thanks
to
for
avail
having
yourself.
me here. That's very good of you. Thank you.
All right. And also, related ho 0800 142 446. You can cackle us on Scharis 00 0800 142 446. Yeah, that's the Africans for you. All right, Ms. Osman, my name is Musutu Stone, by the way. Yes, and welcome to all of you who are actually will be discussing with us tonight. Ms. Osman, let's get into the gist of the matter. The Child Justice Act itself. What does it mean to us and what is it exactly?
Okay, so the Child Justice Act, the Act is numbered 75 of 2008. It came into effect on the 1st of April in 2010. The Act aim is to establish a criminal justice system for children.
Yes.
We want to cater for children who are in conflict with the law. That's the other term that we use. And then we want to expand and entrench the principles of restorative justice for children. And we want to ensure that they take responsibility and are accountable for the offenses that they commit.
That's right. So we're talking what people used to term way back then as toad schools, people who actually go into those kind of facilities. Which what do we call them these days, by the way?
We call them child and youth care centers. And the Stoat School placement area or those kinds of schools have been kind of done away with.
Yes.
There are a whole set of new regulations and rules which govern those, which we can discuss a little bit later as well.
All right. Now, what are some of the main components of this act that we should be actually looking into?
Okay, so previously children were dealt with in terms of the Criminal Justice Act of 1977, which is the act by which all persons are dealt with as when they commit an offense.
Yes.
All right. So this particular act sets the framework for children under the age of 18 who commit offenses. But it also places an emphasis on rehabilitation and reintegration of children once they've been through the process.
That's right.
But also to limit the possibility of children reoffending, because there are other options instead of putting them in jail. Jail is considered a no-no unless there are very, very particular circumstances. So we look after the best interests of the child and of society. And because we know children do commit offenses, we have to find a way that children are able to take responsibility and be rehabilitated for those offenses.
That's right.
We don't want the idea or that society thinks that children are going to get away scot-free with whatever they do. It doesn't work like that. And it's not a soft option, but it is also cognizant of the fact that children are children. So you want a child who commits an offense at the age of 14 still to get their education, still to get the medical help, still to learn other values and to understand that what they've done is an offense. And there are particular measures in terms of court procedures as well as procedures as to how the child is dealt with, which are there, which also include things like diversion, and not going through the criminal procedure that is set out in the Act which governs adults.
A 6-year-old recently went with a gun to school, Ms. Osman. Now, it brings me to this question to say, do you have any age group that is covered in to this act? Because I heard you talking about 14-year-olds, and I'm mentioning this, a 6-year-old taking a gun to school and was almost committed something that they never understood.
Correct, yeah. Okay, so the Act specifies that children under the age of 10 cannot be prosecuted or arrested for committing an offence.
Yes.
So if a child goes to school with a gun and the child is 6, something's gone wrong, if I may say so, in that setup where the child had access to that gun. So that's the first issue. However, a child like that who's then brought to, for instance, to the attention of the police, will be referred to a social worker. So that the social worker, understanding that this child is 6 years old, will then determine what care and protection the child needs in terms of the Children's Act, which is the other act that looks after the care and protection of children.
Yes.
The Child Justice Act deals with the criminal or the offences that children commit. But the Children's Act deals with all children who need care and protection. So children under the age of 10 can't be arrested or prosecuted.
But what happens now if they happen to commit something to a similar... Yes, what happens?
In that case, the child will still be dealt with the children's court. They will be referred by the social worker. The magistrate in the children's court will then determine whether there is an investigation that needs to be done in terms of the family setup or what the situation is, and whether the child needs to see a psychiatrist or go through a program, and whether the child must be paid in a CYCC because maybe the home circumstances are not dealing with what this child is living with.
That's
so
right.
there are lots of possibilities. Unfortunately or fortunately, a child before the age of 10 is what we call criminally not liable. She doesn't have, he or she doesn't have criminal capacity in terms of the law to understand what they've done is an offence.
Well put, Ms. Osman. Very well put indeed. If you have just joined us, this is Let's Talk Justice, and the voice that you just heard explaining very, very eloquently so, Kiyaha Me Pritima Osman. She's the Senior Legal Administration Officer with the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development. Very, very much working with the Child Justice Act, and we're going to be talking about that. Do you have a child who once offended, maybe committed an offense, and you're not sure how to deal with it? Please talk to us. It's 0800 142 446. It's a toll-free number, by the way, and if you are using your cell phone, we will definitely call you back. There is abundance of information with Ms. Pritima Osman talking to us tonight. And Ms. Osman, somewhere, somehow, parents or older people need... let me give you...
I wanted to just speak a little bit more about the age. So we've only covered one category.
Please.
So the one that we covered is the child who's under the age of 10 or 10 and just below 10.
Yes,
okay?
yes, ma'am.
But then you have the child who goes from 11 to, say, 14. Now, those children are still regarded as not having criminal capacity, unless it can be shown that they do have criminal capacity, which means that they show, they understand what is the difference between right and wrong, and whether they can take responsibility and accountability for what they have done.
All right.
Children above the age of 14 are said to have criminal capacity. So if a child under the age of 14 is brought to court, it's for the defense attorneys to show that this child lacks criminal capacity, all right? Or the child must be seen by a social worker or by a psychologist to determine whether the child has criminal capacity. Because we recognize that home circumstances are not always ideal. Children don't grow up under ideal conditions.
Yeah.
And so what happens is that sometimes the understanding of what's right and wrong is not the same for everybody. So in that instance, it would be that the criminal capacity has to be shown. In other words, it is rebuttable. It can be shown the child doesn't have criminal capacity. But after the age of 14 to the age of 18, the child is said to have criminal capacity.
All right. Which the follow-up question I wanted to make was that where do parents, guardians, and older persons who are actually responsible for these kids actually fit into the Child Justice Act?
They fit in all along. Parents and guardians and other adults, in the appropriate adults as we call them, are not removed from the process. First of all, the child grows up in a family environment, hopefully.
Yes.
And even if they grow up in a situation where they are looked after by foster parents or by guardians or in a CYCC, they are still, those adults are meant to be guiding them along what's right and wrong. So there's definitely, though the parents are definitely along with the process. And if they find there is an issue with the child's behavior which they do not find suitable, they have every right to go to a social worker and say, help, please intervene, we need help here in this. This child's behavior is giving us cause for concern.
Yes.
So parents and all the other actors, so to say, who make up the child's unit, who care for the child, are part and parcel of the child's situation.
Before I asked about the benefits, what can the Child Justice Act not do?
The Child Justice Act cannot prosecute a child under the age of 10.
Yes.
There is very little that the Child Justice Act cannot do. In fact, the one thing we shy away from is to put children, especially under the age of 14, in prison.
Yes.
There is no provision that allows that. All right? There is also the where children, for instance, may be arrested by police.
Yes.
Okay? The children may not be put together. In other words, girls and boys cannot sit in the same vehicle, for
That's
instance.
right, yes.
And if they are detained in any way, they may not be detained with adults. So the Act can actually specify and say, no, this is not permitted.
Yes.
And having just mentioned one of the actors in the Child Justice Act, is the fact that I have to mention that the implementation of this Act is done along a very, very intersectoral way.
Yes, yes.
So in other words, if you think about a case, it's not just the mother and the father who are involved. Immediately when a child is arrested, the Department of Social Development's probation officers will be called to do an assessment of this child. So every child must be assessed, and then the process continues. So once we're ready to talk about all the other intersectoral partners, we will talk about that when you're ready.
All right. Thank you so very much. That is the voice of Ms. Pritima Osman, as I said. Very, very valuable information. When Mlaleli, you can call us on 0800 142 446. Mauno umtuan, who is actually ohlupai. Let me just put it that way. Umtuan ohlupai onje. The one that is on the brink of actually being prosecuted or on the brink of doing something very, very out of this world that might lead them into a process of being disciplined legally so. And as Ms. Osman is putting it, the intimidation part of it, because many people are actually very afraid, especially even adults. They're very afraid of the legal processes. Now, how easy does the Child Justice Act actually try to make it as much smooth as possible? Because now we're dealing with vulnerable people, which are children here.
Yes, and the idea that children should be intimidated is not one that we particularly want. What we want is to build a culture of human rights awareness, and also the fact that this is a rights-based act.
Yes,
okay,
yes.
so children have certain rights. However, when they offend against others, then there has to be some form of penalty. All right? So the court process is set up in such a way that the child is not left to think by themselves about what's going to happen to me. So you'll find from the outset, let's say the child has been arrested.
That's very important.
All right?
Yeah.
Then the police call the social worker. The social worker is the one who assesses the child. Okay? Once the assessment is done, the child has to be given a notice to appear in court. So the notice will be handed to the child, and then also in the presence of her parents,
Or
guardians,
guardians.
or caregivers.
Yes.
All right?
That's
And
right.
they will be told which day they need to appear at court for what is known as the preliminary inquiry.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so the preliminary inquiry is a very, very critical part of the process. It is a process which is officiated over by a magistrate. So the magistrate will then also say, and it's also in terms of the Act, that certain people must attend this. And that would be the parents, if there are parents. There must be a guardian, if there's a guardian. There must be another appropriate individual if there aren't the parents and the guardians available. It should also be the school principal. It should be the teacher. It can be anybody who is speaking on about the child and the child herself. Herself or himself. So the child is then also given this opportunity to talk.
Yes.
Because what they're trying to find out is, so what is it that happened that made you commit this offense? Okay? And do you understand that what you've done is wrong?
That's right.
What do you understand by what is wrong and what is right? So in that way, what happens is that the preliminary inquiry will also deal with whether there's an understanding on the part of this child of what is wrong and right.
That's
The
right.
other issues that would be spoken about is whether the child is, let's say, 12 years old instead of 8 years old or
Yes.
whatever. And also at that point, it's decided whether the child would have a bail, would get bail. Now, bail is, the child doesn't have money, I'm assuming.
Of course, yes.
So what would happen is that they would ask whether the parents can afford to have this child placed with them rather than paying bail. And if there's a bail amount that's specified, whether it's affordable or what are the other conditions that can be stipulated rather than having bail afforded to the child. Okay?
Very, very important.
So there are a number of issues that are looked at in terms of that PI. We call it the preliminary inquiry.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
All right, the preliminary inquiry, which was my next question. Thank you so much for explaining much on that one. Let's take callers. We're starting with Mpumalanga, Kanyamazan. How are you doing, Zakele?
Okay.
I would really request that you switch off your radio, Zakele.
It's already off now.
Thank you so very much, my leader. Welcome. Welcome to the program.
Yes, hello njani.
Siyaphila kunjani pa?
Siyaphila ukhuluma na Zakhele ulalele Kanyamazane committee radio station.
Thank you so very much on 107.3 FM.
Definitely.
Ndati.
Umbuto wami uthi if umntwana atholakale agilty no underage, the moment akhula abakulomnyaka lolungele ukuthi angagwetja lelicala liyaqhubeka from underage to adult. And then question number 2, if ukuthi mina as a parent umntwana wami u-pregnant and then upregnise umuntu lo underage and mina ngiyambophisa lo muntu, so umntwana uyammela, so ngiphuma njani kule case as a parent?
All right.
Thank you.
Zakela, thank you so very much listening to Kanyamazane Community Radio. And also in Mpumalanga, there's Alpha Community Radio on 97.8 as well as Mesh FM on 91.7 and Babaton FM on 104.1. Miss Osman, Zakela is asking the criminal record part of it. Now that, he's been convicted now, every process has gone through,
Yes.
and they found him guilty.
Yes.
Does it stay with the child even in his adult life?
Okay, so one of the other aims of the Child Justice Act is to give children the clean slate.
Yes.
Once they turn adults. Okay? So say for instance the child has got a conviction. The child will then be asked, for instance, to follow a program. Once they are diverted, we call that diverted, instead of spending time in jail.
Yes.
They need to complete that program so that when that report goes back to the court, the magistrate can see that this diversion has been successfully completed,
Yes.
which means that the conviction is now done. Okay? So the record is then clean. So when the child turns 18 and he now becomes an adult, 18 is the age at which we become adults.
That's true, yes.
Then the child starts with a clean record.
All right.
If for instance, let's just say, and this is an example I was thinking about, if, for instance, a child commits an offence at the age of 17, and they only manage to trace him when he is 20, let's just say, he will be charged as if he were, as at the date of the criminal offence.
All right.
And if it is a very serious offence, he could be serving his sentence into his adulthood. He would then need to find out whether that conviction, because it was dealt with in terms of the Child Justice Act, has been expunged.
So he was treated as a minor.
He was treated as a minor, correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Because the offence was committed at the time when he was a minor.
Yes.
We also have the issue of children committing sexual offences when they are minors.
That's right, yeah.
And the courts have indicated that that name of that sexual offender could be entered onto the National Register for Sex Offenders. However, before that is just done, it's not done just as a matter of course.
Okay.
The child or the defense attorneys have a right and an opportunity to give representation as to why this child's name should not be included on the register. So it could be the fact that he's a first-time offender, or it's a minor sexual offence, which I don't know if there's ever a minor sexual offence, but it could be
there's
one
nothing
of those.
minor about an
exactly,
offence. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
But it's a
yeah.
serious offence.
It is.
And the thing about the National Register for Sex Offenders is that it's a lifelong record. So it's a very serious registration. And for every job interview you go, or especially where you're going to be working with children, they have to go and find out whether you're registered. So it's a very serious registration.
It is indeed.
Yes.
All right. The second one, he's saying that, say I have a kid who is a girl, and she gets impregnated by an adult, let's say an 18-year-old. She's 16, he's 18.
Okay.
Now, obviously, the father opens the case, statutory rape and all those kinds. Now, here's this minor wanting to stand on behalf of this guy and saying, no, look, it was consensual. This
Okay.
thing.
Yeah.
What happens when it's like that?
Okay, so the Criminal Offences Act says that a child who is who has been sleeping or have sex with somebody who's an adult and she's below the age of 16 cannot consent to having sex.
Exactly,
So that
yes.
would be statutory rape. In that instance, the person can be convicted of statutory rape.
So the lady does not have any say.
No.
In terms of
that's the example. So the example is this child is below the age of 16. She has had sex with this person. Whether it's consensual or not is not the issue. However, where the child is over the age of 16 or she's just turned 16
Yes.
and she says it was consensual, that could be normal consensual sex. You understand? So it depends on the circumstances of the case, whether the consent would have given by an over 16-year-old or whether it was statutory rape under the age of 16. And so there are very many different circumstances that would play. If the child is 14 or 15,
Yes.
the father can go and lay a charge that there has been statutory rape, and the police would have to investigate it.
All right. 0800 142 446. We are discussing Child Justice Act with Ms. Pritima Osman. She's the Senior Legal Administration Officer with the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development. Vilakazi in Mafikeng in Northwest. Dumela ntate. Re tswelele ka kgosi. A utlwetse madume.
Underage. Sometime in the no to do this for the Department of Justice. By the Bella Yang Hawana, Hongwa City, I 14 years. And in Nakana or not to Mamma for the cutting can Kayo. Then can be a Kanka Kuma High and cutting the awareness, right or Karawi Recreation or via community administration, Kabaga awareness or one of the long or this is but barring that personality or Hokati Visagaloba Toga and Kaya
Child Justice Act.
Ntate Vilakazi ke lebogile thata very much. Thank you so very much to the Northwest radio stations as well that are taking part over there. And that will be Moretele Live Mahikeng, Akhanang, Ratau FM, Mabatu FM, as well as Letlabile FM. Yes, and let's go to KwaZulu Natal. Spare from Ladysmith. Hello, Spare.
Yebo sanibona.
Ninjani Spare?
Siyaphila njani nini?
Awu siyaphila.
Hayi siyathokoza na.
Siyakwamukela kulolu hlelo.
Hayi nami ngiyathokoza kakhulu.
All right, ungaphawula ba?
Yebo mina bengilombuzo la engingathanda ukuthi ngiphendulele wona.
Yes sir.
Yebo ngicela ukuza ukuthi ke what if yonke ingane zanamhlanje siyazazi ukuthi sezi kanjani. Ukuthi bathala amafoni lawa akhona ukungena ama-internet ingane. Ukuthi-ke njengoba ingane isiyahamba-ke ibuka izinto ey'ngcolile efonini, isiyahamba esikoleni sifike yenza exactly into eyibona efonini. Ukuthi-ke if ingane mhlawumbe thothi ina 9 years ukuthi ayizuboshwa yini mhlawumbe izovele yekwe. Ngiyathanda ukubeka lapho yilowo mbuzo enginawo mina.
Ngiyabonga Butspe, ulalele kuyiphi radio?
Ngilalele kuyi-radio quiz.
Ngiyabonga ku radio quiz impela. Let's start with Ms. Osman. He's saying social media influence, internet influence is quite very rife in this day and age, and which was one of the questions that we are going to actually deal with. Now, there is this emulation, so much emulation, especially by the minor ones.
Yes.
You know, they do that. And also, he's worried more about the corrective measures of doing such a crime because it was influenced basically, and which we'll talk about also influence of older people, but let's talk about this one, internet and social media.
No, you're absolutely correct that internet and social media do tend to influence the children, especially when children are looking for guidance or looking for leadership. And so it's very important that children and especially the parents of children and the extended family of children set the kind of standards almost that children can observe. However, there are very many examples where children use the media, for instance, to also manipulate and bully other children and intimidate them. We can't say to children, don't use social media. They are going to. But I think it's very, very important to start setting those, have discussions with your children about why you won't get to be a gangster, because that's not real. And shooting at somebody means that somebody gets killed. It's not that you shoot a gun and the next time he's on another movie. So I think the difference between reality and what weapons and knives and all of those things have to be discussed in a setup at school, in churches, in family units, so that the reality of what it is that children or people are doing can, and there's a way of discussing these things in age-appropriate manners, so that you don't terrify children, but they also get an understanding of, if I walk around with my father's gun, first of all, the gun's not supposed to be in my hand, and there's a very real possibility it will go off and kill somebody. So I think that's not up to the law. That is up to the social setups, and those need to be parts of discussions that parents and guardians and caregivers have with their children. But it's not something that the Child Justice Act can, for instance, place as a value for parents, because parents have got their own ways of
That's when a child is getting raised by a village, basically.
Yes, that's correct. That's the kind of upbringing,
All right. Quickly, before we come to you, Mams Bongile and Success, let's deal with Vilakazi's questions. The one that he asked was about the influence of an older person. This child, I'll talk about the drug ones, because I've seen those in Hillbrow and in all these other places where they are actually drug pushers for these older ones.
Correct.
They are also messengers of this. Now, this kid was influenced to do a crime by an older person.
Correct.
How does that work?
All right, so the Child Justice Act actually makes provision for what we call children used by adults to commit crime. It's called QBAC.
Okay.
And in those instances, if, for instance, a child has been arrested, it's really up to the child to, by way of the discussions with the probation officer, to say that, you know, that person on the street corner said to me, I must take this for him. Which doesn't mean that the child is going to get away with it without going further into the process. That's the first thing. So this child will still be dealt with in terms of the Child Justice Act for dealing in drugs or selling drugs or whatever it is that the child was doing. However, that adult will also be arrested. And the adult will be dealt with in terms of the normal Criminal Procedure Act.
So for lack of a better word, the case will be the same between the adult and the child?
Not necessarily. It could be heavier in terms of the adult. But the child's case will be dealt with in terms of the Child Justice Act.
That's right.
And that act will apply in all its measures as far as the child is concerned. Because we must remember that adults still are stronger than vulnerable children.
Of course.
So the adult who's been using the child, he must pay a penalty.
0800 142 446 0800 142 446. Let's go to KZN in Rhodesfield. Mams Bongile Khadebe?
Yebo.
Ninjani ma?
Siyaphila sinezwa kini.
Awu siyaphila impela.
Yebo,
Okay.
sibongile hadwe yesiyani lokhu mama.
Okay ma. Mams Bongile bofuna ukuphawula?
Yebo.
Okay, ungaqhubeka ma.
Ngifisa nje okokuqala ukubonga ngalezi zinhlelo lezi enisibethela zona.
Awu siyabonga impela.
Mina ngilalele lapha ku-radio iCrazy ku-90.5.
That's right ma.
Yebo, ngibonge kakhulu nje ukuthi basihlelele nathi size sizolalela lokho engiqala ukuyilalela ngoSeptember. Konke nje nisenzela khona.
Awu siyabonga.
Esibuzayo kakhulu nokuthi nje uNkulunkulu asigcinele nini ukuthi nizosipha lolu lwazi ngoba kuthiwa ulwazi yikho konke.
Siyabonga, and thank you to Miss Pritima Osman as well.
Yes. Ngibona ke mina abantwana ngingabayekele ngoba ngihlala nabo nami ngiyangitshela nje ukuthi iphoyisa lokuqala umzali, umthetho wokuqala yomzali. Ngizame ukubasiza abantwana ukuthi uma ngabe ngibona lokho abakwenzayo ngisondele eduze ngifisa ukwazi ukuthi inkinga yakhe azangene kule nkinga nje kuyini isifisa salokho kuyini. Abanye bayakwazi ukukhululeka basho, abanye bayathula ugcina ungakwazi ukumsiza ngoba nokuma semkhulumile kanje abanye bayezwa abanye abalaleli. Ngakho nathi singabazali niyasibekelela ukuthi size lokhu ukuthi sizabalekelela kanjalo abantwana. Ngakho siyabonga kakhulu nje ukuthi uNkulunkulu anigcine nisilethele lulwazi nasestation radio quiz ngiyabonga kakhulu.
Sibonge kakhulu impela Mamsibongile Khadebe use Rhodesfield in KwaZulu Natal. Let's move on to Skukuni Kolimpopo Gasikukuni. Success? Tabela success.
Are
Liga mre.
ro na le
Awankabele kwe.
nje ke success o mo Skukuni
Tsena ditabe mre na success.
ntekine go go bolela ke go botsa go re ka gore go tsona bana ba ile gore ba under age ne community right. So then bana ba o tene ga ba le danger so then o dile gore ba ka tshono go swariwa or ba ka tshono go tswela pele ga gore ya tsheko ana mathata motho wa bona ba solfa ka mokgwa mo hutamang ba ka bolishana le social worker go ba ya go le gona.
All right. Rutlile morena ka ke yona fela kere.
Ya ke yona e go botsa.
Ke lebogile thata morena success in Limpopo Gasikukuni. And we're moving to Western Cape eKhayelitsha. Molo mcina?
Ya ngibona tana.
Dinjani na?
Akona.
Asiphilile akhonto tata.
Ya.
Ngena entweni.
Alotana.
Bendithi you want to talk?
Ya wetana.
Okay, ungaqhuba tata.
Yitana manje ngicela umuzo ndikungena eKapa ne. Egmonele FM.
Yes sir.
Now umuzo wami tata naba abantwana bathe ekonini bancane ngama yankweze amancane na. And then kufika amapolisa ayabaswetha the next thing mhlawumbe olethi afumana intaba abafaka evenini. Now the question yami ingaba yenzeka xa zifika pha epolice station bayathathwa na ukuthathwa amafingerprints zabo okanye kunanka omama because oyena lweko lwam kukwenza izinto bengani ingaba xa befika khona phaa e-police station bebandile loo nto yabo bebeyishaya isekoneni bayathathwa na umuzi wam kulapho.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay, Enkosi Putumgina, thank you so much.
Okay.
All right. Yes, very, very interesting question indeed. Let's start with Putumgina's question, Ms. Osman,
Okay.
saying the police are conducting search and arrest, those kind of programs that the police would do. It's on a Friday, they search these kids. One of them is having some substance. Or do they get arrested on the spot? Do they go through the same procedure one would go when they get arrested at the police station? And at what point do you call the parents in? Because you might find that at some point, a Nyaupist wouldn't have any parents to declare because they will be like, I don't know who they're my parents. Or they might have not parents legitimately. So, or how do you go about establishing the connection with the parents so that they get to come to the police station?
Okay, so the fact of those search operations that police run, that's the responsibility of police.
Yes.
And they may have very good reasons for doing that. If a child is found having drugs on them, drugs are illegal,
Yes.
the child can be arrested on the spot. Okay? And when the child is then brought to the police station, they will be asked what their name is and what where they live, and then they will go and try and find those parents. Okay? Once they find out that actually the name that was given was false or something like that, it can happen that the child will be placed in a CYCC, for instance, until they can trace the family or guardians or whatever.
Center for Youth Care Center.
Child Youth Care Center.
Child Youth Care Center.
But that,
just wanted to get that.
Yeah,
one.
it's called a CYCC or a Child and Youth Care Center. Okay, and all of them are all around the country. However, what will happen before the child is placed is that the probation officer will be called, provided that this child is over the age of 10. So the child must be 11 and above.
All right.
So then they'll call the probation officer, and even if the child is younger, they'll still call the probation officer, who will then deal with the child in terms of the Children's Act.
That's right.
But if the child is older, the probation officer will assess the child in order to determine what was it that actually happened, how old the child is, where does the child live, where does the child go to school, etc., etc. Okay? And based on what the assessment finds, there might be parents, or there might be a guardian, or there might be an appropriate adult that this child is living with. It could happen that the child is a child living on the streets.
Yes.
And that child will also be dealt with by the social worker. If an offence has been committed, the child can be arrested, and then the child can be placed in a CYCC until the child is meant to come to court. You understand?
Yes, ma'am.
So the child doesn't always get arrested at a police station. The child is brought to the police station.
That's right, yes.
If they find they are the parents, they will then give the note to the parents to bring the child to court for the preliminary inquiry on a certain date and a time. Okay?
All right.
If there are no parents, the child will be informed, but the child may be placed in the CYCC.
All right.
There are parents who say, I don't have nothing to do with this child. You go and deal with him. Then the social worker needs to take over in order to deal with the child.
Sure, which is very unfortunate.
It does happen quite a lot because he's been a troublesome child and I can't deal with her anymore. Take the child away. I don't want to know. It does happen where children have been, their parents have been refused to take cognizance of this child and treat the child.
All right. Umam Spongile was actually just being very grateful with the information that you have.
you.
I'm passing the message, and
Thank you.
I also concur with her. Quite very valuable information
Most
you have,
welcome.
Ms. Pritima Osman. And also saying that she's staying with the kids, and also would like to remind parents that, the first police in the house
Yes.
is the parent.
Yes.
So, at the end of the day, do you have parents' programs that will be able to help them support these kids once pre or post
Yes.
committing the crime?
Okay, so the programs for parents in terms of parenting is dealt with by the Department of Social Development.
That's right.
And in the Children's Act, there is a stipulation that where a parent or set of parents need to go for parenting training, for instance, that can actually be asked for by the social worker. So there are definitely measures. I think the problem is that maybe we're not using them enough. But the Department of Justice as such doesn't run those programs. And I think this is maybe an appropriate time just to mention that the implementation of the Child Justice Act is not something that we do on our own.
Yes.
So we are the owners of the act, so to say, the main agent. But then we have the Department of Social Development, which plays a critical role in the programs that children need when they need to go for rehabilitation or for any of the other diversion programs that they may have. Then there are the police, as we've discussed.
Yes.
The National Prosecuting Authority is part of the role players. We have the Department of Health, we have the Department of Education, we have the NGOs. So it's a very, very multi-intersectoral implementation situation. And so children, we know that along the way for children becoming an adult, they need these services from all these different sectors. So what we do is we bring them on board so that they can deliver at appropriate times their own services.
And how do you make sure that you don't work in silos? Because those are great programs, but they might be managed from all different spaces. Where do you synergize the whole thing?
Okay, so we don't have the silo approach towards the implementation of the Child Justice Act. We have, in fact, we're having another one tomorrow, what we call an Inter-sectoral Child Justice Implementation meeting.
Right. Yes.
And we have that meeting every second month.
Sort of a cluster, eh?
It's not quite a cluster, it's a bringing together of all the implementation agents.
Right.
But over and above that, there is what we call the DG's Forum, which is the DG's Inter-sectoral forum in terms of the Child Justice Act, where all the DGs of the departments which work together actually come together and say, this is working and this is what we've set up. With the result that we've got, for instance, correctional services, and there are very few children who are in correctional services, but they might have correctional supervision for children. So that, and also so that they can show us what they've got. But we keep tabs on it, and in that regard, we publish every year the annual plan, or what we call the annual report, in terms of the intersectoral implementation of the Child Justice Act. So the listeners can go onto the Department of Justice website and just look for the Child Justice tab, and they would be able to find the annual reports there.
All right, that's www.justice.gov.za, www.justice.gov.za, and then you hit the tab Child Justice Act.
Correct.
All right. Thank you so much for that. And the last one, I think Success did not hear us very well from the beginning when we talked about underage offenders, which are the ones under 10.
Yes.
Can we go through that process again so that whoever just tuned in now actually goes through that?
Okay, that's fine. I think what we need to remember is that the Act sets the limit for children who may be prosecuted. So children under the age of 10 are deemed not to have criminal capacity, and for that reason they cannot be prosecuted for an offense.
Yes.
When a child under the age of 10 is found to have committed an offense, a probation officer will come in, assess the child for that age to see that the child is definitely under the age of 10, and then deal with the child in terms of the Children's Act.
Yes.
Okay, because you can't lay a charge on a child who's under the age of 10 because they don't have criminal capacity.
And he can't go scot-free because he did something.
No. The Children's Act will take whatever measure. And it may also be, for instance, I'm just giving this an example, where maybe the parents have been negligent. In your example of the 6-year-old with a gun.
Yes.
It may be that the parents are negligent. And that's why the child had the gun. So, in fact, a gun should never be lying about. It should be in a safe. Exactly.
Yes.
So, then the law will deal with that in an appropriate fashion.
All right. Thank you so much for repeating that one again. Let's go into our callers again. Anonymous is calling from Port Elizabeth, Nelson Mandela Metropolitan. How are you doing, Anonymous?
All right, man.
Welcome to the program, Mama. Nkosi for calling in.
Yes.
Okay. Ungaqhubeka, ma.
Ingxaki yami nje kukho abantwana ababili abangabenelona bami abakabina ifeki banabantwana endaba abantwana babakhathalele bayanxusa ngoku omnye lona oqala wagusi ne wathatha umakhulu wakhe umakhulu kunabazulwane naye abaninzi okwesibini naye wakhuleka kwemeko yabo etshotshobhini umama notata bayashusha benza izinto ebhidini ekhona imbani all in all kwako omningi bayantana omningi lo omningi wasesibhedlela walala esibhedlela wagula ofumane ba uyagula funeka treatment inyenzekileyo ntombazana ayithile yathi izabagada abantwana ushashalo yakhe pha edorangeni wathi ufuna umuntu onothi bathathu abantwana phansi kwale meko isale ke mina ke ndibangqile ukuthi yakhinga abantwana wathi phansi kwale meko makubekho umuntu beza nentombazana kanti le ntombazana bayasikopa kuyo le ntombazana yathi ingekho ke mnaki yathi le ntombazana hayi yabanceda xa bengenakutya okay ishashalo yakhe yabanika wathi bathatha abantu bahlale ku into enzekileyo omnye lo una plus minus 5 years kanti uyalalwa ngunyana wale ntombazana uyalalwa akaqali and abazala bakhetha basancedana ngoku into enzekayo kanti ngokule game leqayipheleyo bamthathe kabalo mntana lebuyela kwabo bazali bakhe njena ubaleka lo mfana umtisa imthatha iglue umthatha ipilisi bamlala isho zakhe yonke le nto leyo bangifonela manje semsebenzini ngixelela lena ngathi masana umvasa mfeni epolice station bamthe epolice station kwayiwa pha kodwa ke bona abazali babuye besithi ukuthaba kabonwanga kodwa bekunzima uhamba umntana bekunzima ekhongola umntana ngoku icebo lami mina bengibawela mina bathathe nakulaa ntombazana because laa ntombazana yile yokuthekisa abahlala khona ufumane ayakubamelwane
asiyenze fushane masiyenze ibe fushane masiyenze ibe fushane because asinalo ixesha
uthelele apha ngoku ngifuna icebo labantwana bangasuka kulaa ndawo abantwana nalo bathathileyo abantwana akakhatha qha imali yabo.
Okay, ma. Let's hear what Miss Osman is going to say about that, ma'am. Thank you so very much.
All right,
thank you, ma'am. Before we take this one, Miss Osman, let's go to Ndwedwe. Noni, I said it right. Ndwedwe. Dr. Mieza. Ninjani ba?
Siyaphila uDr. Mieza ngisemsinga.
Ngisho kahle angithi ngathi Ndwedwe.
Msinga.
Oh, emsinga babhala Ndwedwe la. Bathu kuye Ndwedwe. Okay. Siyaxolisa ngalokho ba.
Lalela umsakazo iquiz FM ngoba mhlambe isikhathi sesincane. Kodwa umuntu akaphawule athi ngiyabonga mhlambe ukuthi sithole inhlelo efana nalezi ekwazi ukuthatha eminyango nembono bonke abantu basondezele kubantu ukuthi bekwazi ukuzokhuluma nokubeka imbono eyakhayo nephuswe ngalolu hlobo. Ngishisa ke sakazi mhlawumbe lapha ukubheka ukuthi kwenzakalani lapho isimo emakhaya kunabantu mhlambe abangawazi umthetho ngendlela okuyiyona noma ngokwanele ekuthenini kube khona izinhlangano ezifana nalezi ezizosuka esilungwini zize ngo direct kubantu emakhaya zizokwazi ukuthi sikwenza lapho kuthiwa akuxoxelwe nomphakathi kube khona ama-community engagement ama-community debate nama-awareness ukuze ukwazi umphakathi ukwazi ukuthi udaba olufana nalolu okuhlumezeka kwengane baliphakamela kanjani ngoba endaweni ezingesemakhaya ngabe kufanele futhi uyangenelela uyasiza uthothe udaba kuthiwa akubona ubuntu lobo akuyona into indlela esakhuluma ngayo udaba lodinga abantu basekhaya uthothe mhlawumbe omunye womuntu osuke ehlukumezeke noma sokuthi ingane ukhona khona lapha ekhaya kumiswa kanjani esimene sifana naleso noma siyacela mhlawumbe ukuthi ezinye zezinto ake zisuke mhlawumbe phezulu zize ngo direct emakhaya nanokuthi siyacela ukuthi akuhlangana mhlawumbe nomasipala kuboniswana bonke kanjani phambili. Ngiyabonga.
Ngiyabonga Dr. Mieza from Msinga, not Ndwedwe. We still in KZN in Pietermaritzburg. Mark? Sawubona Mark?
Yebo.
Ninjani Mark?
Yebo msakaza angibonge kakhulu igama lami kuMakho kaMthembu ngilalele kuMgungundlovu 107.6 FM the sound of choice of KZN.
Thank you so very much to Mgungundlovu.
Yebo msakazi ngiyabonga kakhulu nami kulezi inhlelo lezi ukuthi ugovernment kube nenhlelo ezikanje sikwazi ukuthi singumphakathi waseningizimu Afrika wonke sigma community radio sikwazi ukuthi sixhumane.
Yes.
Mina engikhala ngakho kakhulu ikuphi khona uhulumeni akwenzayo ukuthi kuhanjelwe nasemasontweni kuyofundiswa izingane ngazo lezi inhlelo nasezikolweni ukuthi ekhanjele nakhona nasemphakathini especially endaweni zasemakhaya ngoba siyasibone lama sibuka indaba kuma TV kube khona ukuthi izingane ziyahlukumeza mangikhuluma nje unodaba ngilibone mhlawumbe mavikini amathathu aphelile olenzeke lapha eThekwini lapho khona umalume kuthiwa wahlukumeza khona umshana wakhe ikupho kwenzakala ukuthi ugovernment ahambele ezikolweni nasemasontweni nasemphakathini ngizolalela kumgungundlo FM ngiyabonga msakazi.
Ngiyabonga baba Mthembu. Thank you so very much. Almost I'm just going to put everything together because it almost refers to the same thing here. One the Anonymous from PE was talking about a very, very unfortunate situation where the kids are born from the parents who are irresponsible, from the word go. It was just some lady who probably got impregnated because they go in clubs, they go into taverns, and they don't even know who the father is. Now, she was staying with these kids up until she could not actually manage on her own because she's a grown-up person. And then there was this lady who actually offered that they stay with her and kept on giving food. But now the problem lies in this lady's house, where one of the family members has been raping one of the kids who happens to be 5 years old. And on top of that, they are teaching these kids basically to smoke glue. She said it specifically so, and also to drink because apparently the family member is a whiskey drinker. Now he's been burning these kids' livers with how do we help? Because this is in Port Elizabeth. Would you know where they should go?
Well, when a matter like that comes up, which obviously falls outside of the Child Justice Act,
yes.
what they should do urgently in a case like that is even this lady who is anonymous was talking about it, should go to the nearest social worker in the area where the children live. And she has to report. The Act, in the Children's Act says that any person who becomes aware of abuse that a child may be suffering must report that matter. Otherwise, that person is liable for whatever damage may happen.
All right, because
so they
now
can
she's
remain
also
anonymous, but they need to report this so that the social workers can go and check what the circumstances are. And they can remove the children without getting a court order. Or the police can remove their children without getting a court order.
That's right.
But they should not live with the fact that they know of this abuse and just allow it to continue. That's not good enough.
And now, Ms. Osman, one thing that she mentioned is that, financial implications could be quite very difficult here because she's been afraid to report, as you say, on a basis that this lady has been the actual caregiver in terms of food, which she cannot do herself. And she is a bit uneasy about it because it might disadvantage the kids in terms of eating and all that. Would there be a program to help that part where money has to be scrapped away to say, once you get these people arrested, the kids are not going to be able to be...
Well, we're assuming in this case that the children were placed in terms of a court order with this lady.
Not at all.
None. So there is no foster grant. There's no money coming out of it.
Yes.
So if the children were removed, the children would be safer than if they were living where they were being raped and given whiskey and all kinds of things to drink. So we need to realize that these children's lives are in danger. There's no money involved to bring the children to the attention of a social worker. Just as in the Child Justice Act, there is no money to have a child go through the process of the act because all the actors are state actors or NGOs.
Yes.
So the duty that lies there is not, and I think what we're actually trying to say is that the money, the woman who's been providing money, providing the care, is getting money from this person. But it's unconscionable.
Yeah.
Whereas these 3 children or 4 children's lives are being jeopardized, they could be killed in that process. And so, that's a value thing that the anonymous person needs to think about. But reporting it to she can do it anonymously as well.
All right. Dr. Mieza is raising another point here to say, rural areas are a problem where mainly so people are not also clued up about legal proceedings and all those. You know, in a village under normal circumstances, you would see a police van probably once in 6 months, only because there's nothing much happening in terms of reporting. You know, and also the police jurisdiction in terms of all these municipal acts and all those kind of quite a bit of jargon over there. But now his question is that government's campaign, reaching out to rural areas, reaching out to churches, reaching out to schools specifically to actually integrate this as part of the education into schools, into all those
I think that's a
setups.
very valuable suggestion, because let me just say to you that we, first of all, in the Department of Justice and with our intersectoral actors, we have what we call provincial officers or regional officers. And we would be very willing to go to schools and talk to them about the Child Justice Act and be able to inform them of what kinds of measures. For that matter, the rural people, for instance, in churches, can also approach our regional office and say, come and talk to us about the child justice. Or they can approach their NGOs who are in the rural areas,
of course,
to say, we need information about the Child Justice Act. And what that would require is that the church or the NGO would contact their regional office in the province, and they can arrange to somehow get the message to them. But it is critical that we actually be approached in that. We do run programs with children in provinces, in rural areas, but we can't go everywhere unless we know where the need is greatest. But we do have regional officers. We do have people who are completely aware about the Child Justice Act. We have provincial actors in all the other departments. Everybody knows it, but we may not know of a particular area, but we would strongly suggest that they try and contact the Department of Justice in that regard.
The rural people, the rural citizens of South Africa, it also takes you to be speaking to the department, to be speaking to the police, to be actually raising a hand and say, hey, we are here.
Correct.
Please come and help us.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, Miss Osman is here in Pretoria in some office, and she would actually not know if you do not tell her.
Yes.
Isn't it?
That's absolutely correct.
Now, as we come to the conclusion, Ms. Osman, are there any other things that you might want to highlight in a matter of a minute and a half?
Yes, I think what we need to also understand is that the Act is not there to see that children remain in that framework of mind that they are useless. The idea of having the rehabilitation of children along the lines of the diversion programs and so on is so that they can understand that I can improve and I can get out of this and become an adult who can contribute to society.
That's right.
We want to have our children become our future leaders. So with that in mind, this is why we make all this effort. We make this effort, and I strongly want to say to people, if they can call us, they can get onto a website, or they can just Google and see where we are. Send in the regional offices, send us an email, give us a call and say we need information.
Yeah.
But the information's there, the services are there, and it can be made accessible if we just know where the need is greatest.
All right, Ms. Osman, thank you so very much. I cannot actually thank you enough for this beautiful, valued program and information. And we hope to see you once more, because definitely we work quite a lot with you. And we will talk more about other child-related stuff that also talk to child protection as well as other child-related matters. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much.
All right, that was Ms. Pritima Osman. She's the Senior Legal Administration Officer with the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development. My name is Musoto Stone, and I go by saying it takes a village to raise this child. Thank you so much. Good night.